All right, welcome once again, everyone. We are officially recording, and that language about the recording can be found in your chat that I read ahead of time. Welcome once again to your first orientation to your AmeriCorps Planning Grant. I am so excited to have all of you here today. My name is Robin Harris. I use she, her pronouns, and my title is Senior Program Officer. I do a lot of the Serve Washington grant making, as well as the training and technical assistance for you as our new planning grant cohort. If you haven't signed in, I saw some people doing that earlier. Thank you. Go ahead and sign in if you have access to the chat box. We'd love to know what organization you're with, your name, and if you have any history with National Service or AmeriCorps or Peace Corps or are an alumni. I see that we got some folks from Vista and have some history with National Service. Yes, thank you. Thank you for signing in. So this is your cohort for the next 6 months. Welcome to each of the organizations here today, the Apprenticeship for Non-Traditional Employment for Women, the Great Peninsula Conservancy, the Northwest Straits Marine Conservation Foundation, the Student Conservation Association, Volunteers of America Western Washington, and the Washington Association of Child Advocate Programs. I look forward to being in community with you all and getting to know you and you getting to know each other. Before we get too far into our presentation today, I want to let you know where I'm located and where I will be coming to you from for the next 6 months. My home and my local footprint is on the ancestral and unceded lands and seas of the Nisqually, Squaxin, Chehalis, and Cowlitz tribes. I want to pay my respect to their elders of the past and those individuals here today through resilience and grit, our colleagues, neighbors, family, friends, and community. You know, land acknowledgements are something the Serve Washington team discusses often, and you might actually find that it changes as our partnership with you grows. We've been talking about when is it really appropriate to do a land acknowledgement? Why is it appropriate for us as an organization or for us as individuals? You know, how can we maybe be more genuine in our approach and less performative? And we are also asking ourselves, you know, are we truly engaging in relationship and community with Indigenous folk in Washington? So we will continue to ask these questions in an effort to do better. Just as a bit of a personal reflection, one of my whys is the opportunity to pause and create space to acknowledge that this world is much bigger than just me or you and bigger than the work that we're going to do here today together. And when opportunities presents, you know, itself in our work, you know, when and how can we center all people and of course the beautiful life force that is our planet. Land acknowledgements are where I first learned there are 29 federally recognized tribes throughout present day Washington, as well as 3 tribes who are not recognized by the US federal government, the Duwamish, Wanapum, and Chinook. Land acknowledgements are also where I first learned about the concept of real rent. And I find that learning opportunity is becoming another important why for me. I realize that, you know, each of us have a really long-standing history that brought us to reside on the land or near the seas we are now. And I encourage you, in particular, those who are not Indigenous, to seek to understand your place within that history. If you'd like to share with our group today where your footprint is located, I invite you to do so in the chat box. We'd love to hear your reflections or your whys or anything that you want to tell us. The Native Land app is becoming a widely used starting point. It can be found easily in your app store if you're not familiar, just Native Land app. I find it really useful when I'm traveling. In fact, the picture you see before you was recently taken when I was up on Squamish land in present-day Canada. So in closing, I think it's important to acknowledge that as planning grants, we and you have the unique opportunity to invite or assess where and how Indigenous organizations and peoples and all BIPOC communities intersect with operational plans. Serve Washington is learning how to ensure fair representation in many of our processes, grant making, member representation, and otherwise, and understand that representation is one step towards liberation of all communities. So you might hear us talk about equity and using an equity lens throughout the planning grant period. And a lot of that means acknowledging where our power and privileges within these systems. So I had my camera on earlier just as we were doing introductions. It's now off for recording and bandwidth purposes, but I'm of European descent and have a lot of other privilege as far as being cisgender and able-bodied. And I like to take space to recognize that systems are really built for me, and AmeriCorps in general is built by and led by the dominant culture. So we are actively listening and learning like many of you, and hope to practice and continue to educate ourselves in real allyship. So I appreciate the moment to just pause and reflect on that. I'm going to put a citation in the chat box where you can learn more about various Indigenous cultures in Washington, and feel free to share any of your thoughts on this subject in chat, and I will be happy to reflect on those later. This citation is from the American Library Association. So as a kickoff to our day together, you can call this an exercise or a bit of an icebreaker. Before you is the Serve Washington mission and vision, which advances national service, volunteerism, and civic engagement to improve lives, expand opportunities to meet local needs, and strengthen community while creating resilient communities. National service, volunteerism, and civic engagements are the foundation of caring communities and a thriving Washington, we believe. So that is how we show up. I would love to hear how your organizations show up. You can, continue to chat in the chat box, or we are a really small group, so I invite you to unmute if you'd like to tell us a little bit about your organization and why you're here today. And then we will move on to a hello and welcome from our executive director. But let's just pause and see if there's anyone willing to share why they are here today. I need a brave soul to be willing to break the ice.
Robin, can you hear this? This is Nathan Daniel calling in.
Hi, Nate.
Hi. All right. Well, I'm doing a multi media here, so I had to call in because my computer's not doing the WebEx for some reason. But anyway, good. You can hear me. So yeah, I'm Nate Daniel with Great Peninsula Conservancy, which is the land trust that serves West Puget Sound, and so we're just across from Seattle, and we have quite a large population here that is underserved. It's a lot of Navy folks, pretty blue collar, working class community, and we live right by this amazing place that is just naturally very beautiful, and our mission is to protect environmentally valuable places and connect people with nature. I've seen in the past that AmeriCorps members can really get a lot of work done, or service done, that is, and really push that forward. So we're excited about the opportunity to potentially have an operational grant to try to get some of these kids who live in and around this beautiful place, but really get stuck in the urban core just because they just don't have the opportunity to get out. We want to connect them to nature and create the next group of conservation leaders, and that does mean looking at everybody in our community. So looking at the thing through, looking at conservation through a DEI lens is very important to us. So that's why we're here. Thanks, Robin.
Thank you. You also gave me a break from my voice. I appreciate it. Do we have other folks?
Yeah. Hi, Robin. This is Don Hunger with the Northwest Straits Foundation.
Hi, Don.
Hi. Thanks for this wonderful welcoming and introduction to the vision for our work. And I'll share that with folks on the call that the Northwest Straits Foundation is a marine conservation organization in the Northwest Straits. So we're the kind of northern 7 counties of Puget Sound, or what was colonially called Puget Sound. We refer to as the Salish Sea. And the impetus and passion for us in our work is to restore marine habitat, coastal marine habitat, for both public access and benefit, recreational benefit, and environmental ecological benefit, and cultural benefit. And I refer to that cultural benefit as a key part of why I want to pursue the AmeriCorps partnership and AmeriCorps program, is that we want to connect the next generation of young people with the Salish Sea, with marine stewardship and education and benefits. And we think that through our partnerships with the state and feds and counties and First Nations and cities even, that we can create that pathway. So we look at twofold outcomes from this work. One is obviously the conservation restoration of the marine habitat, and the second is the engagement in the pathway for next generation, future generation conservationists and leaders in this area.
That's so awesome. Thank you.
I can go next.
Great.
My name is Ryan Murray, and I am the Executive Director of the Washington Association of Child Advocate Programs. We're a statewide entity, and we support 35 local child advocate programs who provide and volunteers to represent children's best interests who are subject of abuse and neglect at the hands of their caregivers. And so we signed up for this program, or hoping to get this. We always need more volunteers and to help represent these kids. And so we were just looking for AmeriCorps to kind of help us with our recruitment efforts throughout the state. So.
Wonderful. Very exciting as well. Any other programs want to share? Okay, well, we will let some of you off the hook, and we will learn more about you as we continue to work together in this cohort. Thank you very much for taking some time, those that introduced yourselves, and I just really look forward. I love this time of building a new cohort and listening to all of the great visions that you have that hopefully we can support in the next 6 months. With that, I'd love to welcome Amber Martin-Yon, Serve Washington's Executive Director, who's got a few minutes to stop by and say hi. Amber?
Hi, Robin. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay. Let me know if there's a problem. I turned on my video and it's been a week of technology. Hi, everyone. Amber Martin-Yon, Executive Director. My pronouns are she, her, and I am really pleased to be able to welcome you to this planning grant process. Many of you in listening to you talk or your introductions mentioned some exposure to VISTA or AmeriCorps State and National. And so you already know that AmeriCorps is hard. It's not the easiest program to run, and there's a lot of compliance aspects to how you do that. That's one of the real strengths of this planning grant process, and Robin does a phenomenal job of making sure that you all know what you need to know to minimize any risk to you or your organizations. But I think the bigger part of this whole or power of this process is the opportunity for us to build relationships. So I appreciated learning why you come to this work and what you're hoping to achieve. And I hope you will see this kind of compressed, abbreviated planning grant period as an opportunity, not just to get done the tactical stuff you need to get done, but to really be intentional in how do we strengthen the relationship between Serve Washington and your organization so we can work together in moving some of these missions and visions forward. And how do we intentionally engage community in these efforts? To make sure that we're headed in the right direction. So I just wanted to say hi, we're glad you're here, and let you know that my door is open. And if there's ways that I can help as an executive director of Serve Washington, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Don't ever call me with a special compliance question because I will immediately refer you to Robin. But call me for other things. I am here to help. And so welcome to the team, and I'm sure I'll hear more from you soon. That's all I've got, Robin.
Perfect. Thank you, Amber. I don't know, before you head off, Amber, if you want to drop your email in the chat, go ahead if you, or I can a little bit later.
I will do that. Thanks.
Thank you. All right. Yeah, Amber mentioned some tech issues. So not only am I losing my voice a little bit, but we didn't have access to our shared drive of files for a couple of days. So my PowerPoint notes are something that I'm going to work through today as we move along. So Amber mentioned it, and you know, today we're going to really dig in to what you can expect for the next 6 months. And you may or may not know that AmeriCorps can be an interesting, you know, very successful and wonderful implementation when a community decides that that is the right avenue to meet any gaps or service needs. It also has the side of compliance and the side of grants management, and um, is a federal program passed through a state agency, which brings along a lot of bureaucracy. Let's just be honest. So if you haven't figured it out, or if you don't have history, ultimately, should your programs become tangible operational grants, you know, you or someone in your organization really will end up being the new CEO of the AmeriCorps program. You know, you're going to have roles as an executive director and HR manager. There's a lot of like personnel like things that happen for AmeriCorps members. There's the grants management side of things. There's often, I hear folks say, I've become a social worker to this group of humans trying to do good. A little bit of accounting is always helpful. Compliance officer is definitely something we see. Sometimes emergency management. A lot of our programs will step up when the community is suffering. And so I'm just kind of curious, for those that do have experience, what maybe have I missed on this list, or what are some things and roles that you might expect to see should you have an operational AmeriCorps program?
Well, I would, this is Don again. I would tease out. I mean, they fall in. I think the headings obviously capture the areas. I just tease out a couple in my mind. One is that under HR, there's the active recruitment process, and the recruiter who is the liaison between your program and whatever the community is that you're reaching out to engage. So recruitment or engagement of staff, and then
Yes.
social work to me is on the other side of it. It's an advisor and mentor. Really, really critical in a successful program to make sure that those young folks we bring into the AmeriCorps leave with a sense of confidence and resilience and skills. So that happens through advising and mentoring.
Absolutely.
I can go, Brian Young with SCA. Definitely find in AmeriCorps being so tied to the communities that we serve, like we do in our roles outside of AmeriCorps, just that aspect of engaging the community and being the face of the program, and in a lot of ways AmeriCorps as well, as we're serving in those communities.
Yes. Yeah, those are all really great, especially those of you that have experience. You're teasing this out really well, as Dawn said. I've also heard when I've done this before, media and marketing might fall kind of under communications, but some folks have brought that forward. And then fund development. And so we're going to talk a lot about the fact that this is a public-private relationship. And in order to really have a successful program, there has to be some fund development around other program income beyond what the federal grant may provide. Thank you. So another question, especially for some of you that this may all be really brand new, this whole notion of AmeriCorps and what I like to call the AmeriCorps way of life. How are you going to learn all of this stuff? I just, introduced a lot of roles and, quote unquote responsibilities. And you've heard us say that, there's a lot that goes into these programs. That is the beauty of a planning grant, period. And to be honest, I don't know how we ever launched operational programs before we started doing planning grants. We did for about 20 years, and it was just a rocky start. And so we truly believe that the planning grant is the way to go in order to launch a successful AmeriCorps program. And you're going to have access to all of the things we talk about through a couple of different websites. And this will all be at your fingertips a little later on, but I would like to show you a couple of pieces that I think are important to pay attention to once you get this and can start to bookmark pages. And some of this came in your welcome message. But let me click on a couple of these and show you first and foremost your planning grant homepage, for lack of better words. And right now it looks a little bare bones, and it's going to fill up. It's going to become quite the library. This first heading, it looks like a heading. It's actually a link to a document. This is your curriculum that you have received a few times, so that is available should you need it. And then under each of these sessions, which also link to the webinars should you need it, quick day of if you don't have the webinar calendar appointment. But you will start to see that we post the recordings here, the PowerPoint presentations, and any materials that go along with the learning content for that day and time. Move some of all my boxes here that are open. We also have this additional resources page, and this is something that all of our grantees use in one form or another. I will just call your attention to the second bullet here, which is the planning grant terms and conditions, as well as the AmeriCorps terms and conditions. These are documents, they're fairly legal in nature, but they are going to accompany your contract. And this is probably a good time to update you and once again apologize and ask for grace as the federal government continues to work through all the technical pieces to get those that final award to us, which will initiate the state contract process. And once those state contracts go out, you will see these types of attachments. And the special terms and conditions in particular, it's pretty short. It's only a couple of pages, but it will really outline the purpose, some of the expectations, how to get your reimbursements, right? So that's going to be important. How do you get your money? And we have a webinar next week on that as well. It talks a little bit about records retentions and budget modifications and affiliation with AmeriCorps. This will become substantially longer when you go operational, but did want to call your attention to that as well. And then finally, in the welcome message, we gave you a PDF of the handbook, but it is also online. And it really is the guide for our operational programs, but it is what I use throughout the planning grant period. And it is something that you're going to refer to often. So we today are going to spend some time just doing a brief overview of each of the chapters. I'm not going to dig too far in, but just get you kind of used to what is in this handbook. And you'll peruse it and start to make kind of your own notes and use of it. But on this page, you can access the handbook. You can also access a new program checklist. That might feel a little daunting right now, but maybe, midway through, you might want to start to look at like, oh, I really think this is going to, come to fruition. What do the new programs, need? And this directly reflects our handbook pages. So it's a nice little friendly checklist that you can start to see where your knowledge is at. And then finally on this page is just all of the appendix items. So anywhere in the handbook where it refers you to a form or a template, those are here. And if we can't link them specifically around fiscal stuff because it's very specific to each budget, we still note it and tell you where you can go to ask about it. So with that, we're going to kind of move into more of the presentation for today, and I apologize in advance. It's fairly lecture based. I know we have people all along the spectrum of knowledge, and so this is really intended to be a very brief overview. If you feel confused at any point in time, don't worry. We will come back to each of one of these pieces in depth. If we were together, which I really prefer normally, I'd be passing out handbooks. I'm still the person that in some cases I do like a hard copy to make notes in. If you're lucky enough to have two screens, you're welcome to pull it up. But I want to go through kind of each chapter and the purpose of those chapters so that should you start to do that reading on your own time, you might have just a little bit of a foundation. So the purpose of the handbook is twofold in that one, we attempt to pull all the AmeriCorps sources into one location. And what I mean by that is AmeriCorps in some ways is not very streamlined. And so instead of trying to send you to 20 places, you can go to the handbook, which will then link you to the most appropriate document. It also gives us the opportunity as the state commission to add on any other state standards. So if you're not familiar with AmeriCorps or service commissions, every state and territory has a commission where the funds flow through and into the AmeriCorps programs. And so because it's going through that additional state layer, a lot of commissions have other either rules or regulations or just standards for their programs in their states. So the handbook will also really nicely call out what applies in Washington. So the first chapter I like to call Stop and Smell the Roses, and it's actually the shortest chapter, but it's probably one of the most important that you will start to come back to and linger in, as it includes all the key websites and an introduction to governing laws, regulations, and terms and conditions. So it is a lot of links to other documents. And we keep it as updated as we can so that you can become intimate over the course of the planning grant year with all of those kind of foundational pieces that you might otherwise not know where to find. So again, it's a place to linger. Some of you may be familiar with what we call the AmeriCorps onion, but it's basically our guiding principles, with the outermost layer being the National and Community Service Act of 1990 that kind of started all of this at a federal level. It's been amended multiple times, most recently known as the Serve America Act. Of course, then we have all of the Code of Federal Regulations that interpret the statute and the terms and conditions from both the federal agency as well as the State Service Commission. And as you start to get to the center of that onion, there's the funding opportunities and any FAQs that go along with a specific type of stream of service or a specific fund, and your approved application and budget, and what you're really allowed to do within that approved operational program. If you look at your curriculum, one of the first things it will do is link you to some of these documents for initial homework, and to begin just locating is the first part of it. These are massive documents. They're very much written at, you know, a legalese type. So I don't expect people will memorize them at any cost, but knowing where they are, and then you'll learn kind of where you need to go when you need to interpret something. So they're linked in your curriculum, they're linked here in chapter 1, and as you move through the entire handbook, when we need to go to a specific CFR, we will again link you directly to, you know, whether it's 2205.4671, right? Instead of having you try to dig for it, we will point you to the exact rule. I'm going to stop and just scan the chat. Don't see any hands. Do feel free to stop me at any point. I think it's a small enough group. I'm super happy to be interrupted. I don't have to be the only one talking. I'm prepared to do that, but if you have questions at any time, I'm not sure I've said that I welcome any type of, yeah, interruptions. Interruptions are great. So chapter 2, I call Falling in Love with National Service. And it's kind of where we soften the blow of all of the governing documents that we gave you in chapter 1, and try to make it a little less scary. So we have a really proud history in Washington. The 1993 National Service Trust Act that created the corporation, which is doing business as AmeriCorps, really brought service under one umbrella. However, our state had some things that they were engaged in way before that happened, some milestones of our own. In the 1930s, the Civilian Conservation Corps put workers in the Olympic National Park and the Spokane Indian Reservation. Later on in the 70s, Washington was a pilot site under what was then called the Action Agency, kind of envisioning what might become AmeriCorps. It included senior service and the VISTA program. In the 80s, the state itself has legislation passed for the Washington Service Corps and the Washington Conservation Corps, both of which predate AmeriCorps but were later anointed as AmeriCorps programs and are still active today. They're two of the largest programs in the nation, in fact. And so here we are in, what are we, 2022, believe it or not. That still freaks me out, I think. I'm not used to being in the 2000. I was a 1990s teenager, so it's still a little awkward. But here we are today. We have 18 million in federal AmeriCorps funds coming into Washington, as well as 28 million in match. That covers 19 operational programs that serve Washington overseas and 1,400 AmeriCorps member positions. Of all the states and territories, Washington actually ranks 4th in commission funding. So population-wise, just as some perspective, we're the 13th most populated state, but we're the 4th as far as AmeriCorps competitive funding, which is really excited. We're very proud of that. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that we do have the Washington Service Corps and Washington Conservation Corps, which are multi-million-dollar statewide grants. And now we have you. And the programs are really who does all of this work. So all of this kind of quote unquote bragging is really about our programs and our members and the amazing service footprint that we have in our state. And so we really just want to welcome you to that family. So let's look at that kind of in another way and in like a bit of a hierarchical way, and introduce you to other types of streams of service and how they flow in our state and where you can contribute. So first and foremost at the top there, AmeriCorps, the federal agency in Washington, D.C., they recently went through a massive restructure and rebrand. So they are legally known as the Corporation for National and Community Service. Very long, very confusing with that word corporation. We used to refer to them as CNCS, and I might still accidentally slip, but they're actually doing business now as just AmeriCorps in general. You may see all of these things interchangeably, especially because the laws and the regulation still reflect the legal name of CNCS. So we're all kind of trying to unlearn some terminology there. And it's a little difficult when you talk about AmeriCorps. Are we talking about the federal agency right now? Or are we just talking about a program or a person? So there's a lot of lingo that can get confused, and we will try to help with that. So with them, AmeriCorps being, you know, the DC federal agency, they have a few different ways in which they push out funds. So on the very left, we have our AmeriCorps national programs. These are programs that operate in more than one state. So you may have heard of Teach for America. That's a pretty popular, well-known AmeriCorps national program. And if they're operating in more than one state, they're not going through a commission. They're just a direct prime grantee of the DC office. The DC office has also regionalized. So our most local federal office is in Los Angeles, and the regional office is who oversees and funds VISTA and AmeriCorps seniors. So you may come across VISTA members in our state or AmeriCorps seniors in our state or even National Direct members in our state. They just are reporting to a different prime entity. So then here we are as the pass-through entity, the single state commission, and we receive both competitive dollars and a formula allocation to fund single state applicants, which essentially you are as a planning grant. And should you apply just to operate in Washington, your operational grant would also be through us here in that little red circle. So if we were in person, we'd be kind of flipping through pages, and we'd happen on to chapter 3 now. And 4, I'll go over a little bit kind of simultaneously. Chapter 3, I kind of like to call passing the torch. It's really about us engaging in the learning process, getting into the weeds of what's important to know before or at the beginning of an operational grant. You know, what systems are you going to need to implement? Chapter 4 takes it one step farther. It's kind of like, you got this now, you understand the foundation. You got to keep learning a little bit. And what are the systems that you need next now that you have a foundation? There's a lot of talk about compliance in these chapters, but we know that compliance is important in that it's the means to the ends. It results in community impact and the reason that we are all here. So I'm not going to cover everything, but I do have a couple of highlights that I think are really important to introduce today. So right away at the beginning of chapter 3, there's some definitions on some of our lingo. You've probably heard me say some of this, and it probably hasn't sunk in yet. That's totally okay. We'll revisit this quite a few times, and those definitions are there for you to look at. but there's the notion of a prime grantee and a sub-grantee, the prime grantee being that first level out of headquarters, and the sub-grantees being anyone that then those primes fund. There's multiple numbers that go into all of these types of agreements. You have a grant identification, an application identification. You'll eventually have a Washington state contract number, and those things come into play at different times. So we try to address that and help you better understand which each number refers to what. You'll hear me use the acronyms NOFO, NOFA, and the RFGA. Those are all basically funding opportunities. The feds tend to use the NOFA, NOFA, Notice of Funding Opportunity, and we as a state entity tend to use the RFGA acronym, which is a request for grant applications, but that's how you're going to apply, and that's actually how you applied to get your planning grant. You responded to a Serve Washington RFGA. You've heard me say competitive and formula. So there's a couple of different types of funding that you have access to apply to if you decide to go operational. Competitive funds are national funds that all of the states and territories are kind of in competition for and applying for, and that's the one that makes Washington, number 4, and we tend to get a lot from that pool of dollars. And then our formula, each state and territory is just given a lump sum to do with what they please. So we also have our formula dollars where we make local decisions on AmeriCorps programming. Eventually, we're going to talk about members, probably one of the most important reasons why you're here. And there's some interchangeable terms such as member position. What is an MSY? It stands for member service year. It's somewhat like an FTE in the employer world. It's kind of the fraction of time spent. And then you also have different slot types. Are these folks serving full-time or part-time or minimum time? There's about 5 or 6 different slot types at this point that you might want to entertain as you build your program designs. And finally, all of our awards, the financial agreement is either through a cost reimbursement or a fixed amount. Cost reimbursements are very standard grants with line item budgets, and you're reimbursed based on your expenditures. And then we have this kind of unique fixed amount financial relationship that comes into play later on. Everyone kind of starts as a cost reimbursement, and then you can earn the privilege to become a fixed amount grant, which there's pros and cons to both. If you're curious, how does this all relate to you right now? Each one of you is considered a cost reimbursement formula sub-grantee. Another important distinction is AmeriCorps versus employees. So by statute, AmeriCorps members are not employees. In the law, they're defined as a participant in an approved national service position. We don't use the word participant a ton. It comes up here and there. We usually are calling them AmeriCorps members, but it's really important that we avoid using terms like employee. They're not necessarily working a job, they're serving in a position. So we want to make sure that while in some cases the treatment of an AmeriCorps participant or a member should look no different than any other volunteer or employee in an organization, but we really want to make sure that we're branding ourselves in the appropriate way, and also educating folks around us that there are differences, and your AmeriCorps member, may not necessarily answer the phones or make that coffee run. That's really, they need to be doing exactly what they're grant funded to do. Another important distinction on the bottom there is the idea of non-duplication and non-displacement. So AmeriCorps is not intended to duplicate any activities already available. So we're not recreating programs that are already down the road. We're not supplanting any funds, and we're not displacing any employee or volunteer positions. So this is really about capacity building, meeting a new need, filling a gap, And the good news is while we need to continue to keep these things in mind, one of the things we do with the proposals you submitted is look for those red flags. So we didn't see a lot. We think that, what you're going to be working on is right in line, but we will continue to use this lens as you design your program. Now I know this is tiny. This is not fun to read. I'm not going to read it to you. But because it is cited in law, I didn't feel like I could trim it down. And it's really important to note the prohibited activities, what AmeriCorps programs and members absolutely cannot do. And it's not even do, but be perceived as doing or come close to doing. Like, it's a very clear line that these activities should not be attempting to influence legislation, staying away from political activities, engaging in religious instruction, providing a direct benefit to a for-profit business. Abortion services and referrals were added after the initial list. And then they leave at the very, very bottom, they leave this terminology saying, or anything else that we decide at any given time. So a couple of those things that came about in recent years is it is also not been passed by Congress to be in law, but it is in our terms and conditions that our programs and our members cannot be supporting census activities or election and polling activities. And again, we didn't see red flags in your applications, but it's important that we all continue to reflect on this and just keep this in mind. And you'll kind of hear me come back here every once in a while, whether it's in a group like setting here or when we have our one-on-one meetings. I think it's also important to note that these are civically minded programs more than likely that are going to attract civically minded individuals. And while we draw the line on what they can't do in service or on grant time, everyone is allowed to, in their personal time, to do many of these activities. So that was a lot about what you can't do. And usually then I get asked, okay, well, what can I do? And there's so much that our programs cover. Um, and it's really driven kind of in a funnel system through the awarding process. So the activities that they can do are often highlighted as like priority areas in a funding opportunity or in a grant application process. And then once you actually receive award, you're kind of locked in to that set of activities. And then that will actually be narrowed down into a member position description, which will really outline specifically what that individual position or person will be doing in the community. 70% of these types of positions are going to be direct service, whether to a person, a community, or the environment. There is an allowance for training, so your members will be able to, be in kind of an educational situation, whether it's with you or with a host site, that can't exceed 20%. And if it makes sense, which it doesn't always for all positions, but if in particular it makes sense for your members to do any fundraising, that is capped at 10% of their time. AmeriCorps is available to all without regard to race, color, national origin, gender, age, religion, sexual orientation, disability, gender identity or expression, political affiliation, marital or parental status, genetic information, and military service. And I chose to read that because I think it's not only important to hear all of those different identities, but it's important to know that AmeriCorps, the agency, continues to build upon and revisit this list. And I'm really proud of them for some recent additions that they have put as they try to become more and more, as we all try to become more and more inclusive. You will see by legislation in Washington and sometimes by design in your grant application, some programs will be tailored to a specific age group, and that is allowable if approved in that program design. So sometimes we have programs that are, focusing just on youth unemployment rates, or we have like our Washington Conservation Corps by state legislation was really developed as a workforce pathway for young adults. So things of that nature. AmeriCorps has a zero tolerance for harassment of any individual or group of individuals for any reason. So I know I'm talking a lot. We have a couple more slides here before a break. I don't see any questions quite yet, but again, I welcome them at any time. This next section is going to get pretty specific. And, technically, if you were with us in a group and we were in the handbook, I'd probably have us go through this really like page by page, but I've highlighted some of the most important pieces on the upcoming slides. Criminal history checks, or what we call National Service Criminal History Checks, NSCHC, is one of the most important compliance aspects of any AmeriCorps program. More importantly, it is written into statute for the safety of members and service recipients. And you're going to learn a lot more about this. In fact, midway through the planning grant period, you're actually going to test this and do a deep dive. There's a training you'll go through. You'll engage and start to set up some vendor contracts and actually test some staff to make sure everything's working right. But I also wanted to mention it now because organizations may see this and think, oh, we already do this. Our HR department is on it. We screen, we do all these wonderful practices. The fact is that I have yet to encounter an organization, even with the highest standards, that meets the AmeriCorps statute in this area, because it is very, very specific, not only on what types of checks, but how you get those checks done. So I'm going to bring it up here and again later, just to plant that seed that please look at this as different than your current HR policies and practices. And unfortunately, in some cases, that may mean that folks go through your organizational piece and the AmeriCorps piece, which may feel duplicative, but it's really that important that we follow the guidelines written in our statute. So who, I see your chat, Ryan. Who does National Service Criminal History Check really apply to? So first and foremost, I will say if you do have any history with National Service, the law has been rewritten as of late. The newest one came out last May of 2021, and they continue to try to streamline and make this a little easier. But right now, across the board, AmeriCorps members all must go through this process. And then as far as staff, it's really about staff in positions when they will receive a salary, whether it's directly through the grant or reflected as match under a cost reimbursement grant. So not necessarily, your ED that might be covered in your administration rate, but your personnel that are kind of listed in section 1 of your budget. And some of you might be familiar with that just from building your planning grant budget. I'll also say that criminal history checks no longer apply to planning grants. We used to have to do this before we were even allowed to talk to you. Now we get to use this as a learning opportunity, and this will all go into effect once you go operational.
So Robin, I just want to be clear, before the person that we hire through this grant can accept the job or take the work, we have to do the background check?
Very good question. Not for planning grant staff. Just once we move into an awarded operational grant, if that person remains that's one of the things we'll do during the planning grant period is we'll get everyone cleared.
Fantastic.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that question. So as we're going through this process, there are by law, again, a handful of things that make someone ineligible to work or serve in an AmeriCorps program. And that is anyone who refuses to consent. That makes a lot of sense, right? Anyone who makes a false statement in connection with National Service Criminal History. That gets a little gray, especially when you're working with young people. So we can flush that out a little bit more. We're just looking for folks that are, intentionally trying to get around the system or lie about their history. But we do have members every once in a while that may forget something or unintentionally forget to let us know what might be coming. And then as far as convictions, there are two. One, anyone registered or required to be registered on a state sex offender registry or the National Sex Offender Registry is automatically ineligible, and anyone convicted of murder. Now, we also have programs that are going to be potentially designing interventions that work with highly vulnerable populations. So you also will have the opportunity to add to this list if there are other pieces that might be like state licensing or some other pieces that you may want to kind of add to what we would consider an adjudication list. I also will say that we will work to better understand the whys behind that and push back a little so that we are ensuring that these opportunities are available to most folks. So once you learn about all of this, it's also important to know kind of by when and what checks. And I see right now that I wrote cheeks. So I will try to remember to update that before I publish this. So by statute, the NSCHC compromises a check of the National Sex Offender Public website. It's very specific on how you will accomplish that. A name-based check of the State of Service Registry. So for Washington, that's through the Washington State Patrol. It's called a watch check. Also a name-based check from a state of residency if not in Washington. So maybe if your program's down south and someone lives in Oregon and commutes for their job, we'd also be checking Oregon. It is not unheard of for members to move from out of state. So if they're applying from, say, I don't know, the East Coast, you'd be checking the state of residence before they accept a position and get here. And then finally, everyone will also have a fingerprint-based check through the FBI. And all of these checks must be completed, adjudicated, that means reviewed, and documented, signed off on that they were looked at and they meet the basic criteria before the individual can start their service or before an employee can charge time and work on this grant.
Robin, is there a list of disqualifying crimes?
Just the two for AmeriCorps purposes, the sex offender and the murder, but you would have an opportunity to add to that list as long as you're willing to apply it consistently. So additionally, and this is where some of those commission standards come into play, Serve Washington requires all of our programs use the AmeriCorps designated vendors. They are called TrueScreen and FieldPrint. TrueScreen is going to do a package for you. It's an online name-based way in which you complete via a computer or smartphone the NSOPW check, the state of service, and the state of residence check. So kind of you get all three in a bundle. And then FieldPrint is the local vendor at various kiosks throughout the state where you can go to have your fingerprints taken. And these are folks that have applied to be the designated vendors through a competition nationally, and we feel like they are the most educated in how to do this properly. So we do require our programs use them. Currently, 100% of our programs are using them. In rare cases, we would entertain an alternate process if you can justify the need, and have a policy and procedure that we can review and feel meets the requirements. But so far, everyone has found TrueScreen and FieldPrint to be useful and available. In fact, we got 2 kiosks added recently, one up on the peninsula where they were traveling, I think, like an hour to Grays Harbor, but we got one more north. And then we've added one kind of central Washington in the Wenatchee area. Folks in Wenatchee were either having to go to Spokane or Yakima. So now we have one more central Washington too. And then you will work on a policy and procedure so that, you know, anyone can pick this up at any given time in your organization and be able to remain successful and compliant. Any other questions? Okay. So Robin, why aren't we talking about members? You're like, that's what I'm here for. Members are also covered throughout chapters 3 and 4 and is really the deep dive kind of second half of your curriculum. So I'm not going to get in it today, but we're going to learn about timekeeping and position descriptions, and you're going to, you know, kind of come up with what your orientation and recruitment planning looks like. So all of these words on the screen are something that you will start to practice and learn in depth through the ongoing monthly webinars. That said, I do like to pause for just a moment of inspiration and highlight one of our previous AmeriCorps members, and also take another chance to rest my voice for a second. So please enjoy this video. Liliana.
After college, I felt a little uncertain about what the next step was going to be. I felt like I didn't know what the path was for myself. I found it challenging to find a job in my area of study in an entry-level way, and wasn't ready to go to grad school quite yet. I did AmeriCorps here in Seattle. I heard about the program through a friend of mine whose cousin was enrolled in a service year in Portland. I looked online and was amazed at the diversity of kinds of experiences that were out there across the country. One of them was here in Seattle with a nonprofit called EarthCorps, and was lucky enough to be hired. I had no experience in environmental work, but I always felt at home outside, so I was willing to try something new. I met a lot of folks that were similar to myself in the sense that we were all looking for some sort of pathway to a career and an experience that would further inform who we were and the world around us. We were a 6-person crew, and we would do projects anywhere from stream restoration to trail work and habitat restoration, and working with the community and service projects at local parks. At the end of the 2 years, I felt like I knew myself a little bit better. I had more empathy for the community, for the world, because I was centered in who I was. I felt like I could truly speak to the value of service and what that means for me personally. And now I work on environment and climate issues for Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal. The most exciting part about working for the Congresswoman is having the opportunity to meet so many people in this district who are passionate and committed to environment and conservation work and community. I have a personal connection with it, and to be able to work for a Congresswoman who cares deeply about these issues as well gives them a sense of comfort. My name is Liliana Ayala, and I did 2 service years with EarthCorps.
can see our legacy logo every once in a while. I'm not sure if I addressed that earlier, but up here, the kind of A is what AmeriCorps for 25 plus years used, and we've now switched to this other A over here on the slide deck on the right. A question did come in that I'm sorry I didn't address before the video about templates for policies and procedures on criminal history checks. We don't necessarily have templates. We do find that most organizations have a real specific way in which they have to write policies and procedures and get board approval. But what we do have is a checklist on what to include in your policy and procedure. So we will introduce you to that once we get to that point in the curriculum. It's a great question. So I promise I only have a couple more slides and we'll take a break. Affiliation with AmeriCorps is very important. In fact, some of you spoke to that earlier in your introductions. We really want to make sure that as we begin to plan, that we're always keeping in mind how we can get the A out there, whether it be through our gear or accessories. How can we ensure that our folks, when at their organizations or in community, are represented for a really, long time, or at least since I was young. I always knew what the Peace Corps was, but I don't think I ever heard about AmeriCorps, which started about the same time I was in high school. I didn't know it was an option. It's just not a household name, even after 25 years. It may have pockets of, heightened acknowledgement, but really folks learn about AmeriCorps through word of mouth. And so as part of any grant agreement, affiliation and branding is part of our overall responsibilities. And finally, before we take a break, I just wanted to touch on records retention so you can begin to think about this now instead of at the end of the grant. This is also in your special terms and conditions that will come with your contract, but you do want to start thinking about how you're going to keep your planning grant records. We do believe the best way to do records retention is by grant number. So even if you were to go operational, you don't want to commingle any planning grant records with future operational grant years. So we suggest building systems now that are all about this period of time and are associated with this grant. So keeping that fully executed contract, and once you get it, any fiscal records and support documentation, the materials that you'll be building, the homework you'll be doing. You'll take some trainings such as the criminal history, you'll get a certificate for that. Those are all going to be expected to be retained, and not just retained for a little bit. Unfortunately, this is one of those maybe burdensome / bureaucracy pieces. The federal government actually requires 3 years of retention for any federal funds. Washington State has a higher requirement. In Washington State, it's 6 years. So because we are getting these funds through a state contract, these types of grants and these records need to be retained for quite a long period of time. Additionally, it gets even more confusing because it's based on the prime grant closure. That's like our grant that you're a subgrantee out of, and you're not going to know that. So we tell you well in advance when that prime grant comes to a close and what your destruction date is. But because that's, multiple years down the line, you're just going to want to, at some point in time, create a really good system, whether it's electronically or hard copy, and be able to, at the end of your planning grant period, like archive that again electronically or in a box, and wait for that destruction record to come your way. An absolutely great question. You can begin to use the AmeriCorps logo now as you're building relationships in community and starting to work with what might be stakeholders or funders or host sites. If you plan to go outside of like your organization, please, yes, you have the freedom to do that. I would ask that you use the Washington one instead of the generic. So up here at the top, this young person that's out in the woods has the generic national brand, and on the right you can see each commission has one for their state, and these can be found on our website. Back on that handbook page, one of the appendix items is our logos, and you have the option of blue, both kind of in this stacked format, and a longer kind of side by side format. And then they also come in white, and they come in various file types, which work better for, different like websites or clothes. So there's like JPEGs and PNGs, and I forget the other one, but there's a couple of different file types as well. While we're on break, I'll make sure you get that link here in the chat. So we are doing really good on time. I'd be actually willing to do more of a 10-minute break if folks felt like that would be more useful. Any preferences on 5 versus 10? Okay, we had a couple of votes in each department. I'm going to do a 10. I think my voice needs a little bit of a rest. So I'll change my timer here. You guys are welcome to step away, and when you come back, you'll see a 10-minute timer going on. So thank you, and we'll be back in a bit. All right, welcome back. Can someone just give me a thumbs up or a yes in the chat box that I'm back and you can hear me? Great, thank you. All right, the second part of orientation is actually much shorter. I always find once we start to take breaks, it just gets that much harder, right? And I really appreciate everyone's willingness to listen to me for so long. So as we kind of wrap up, a final note on the handbook, the last two chapters I refer to as kind of the way in which our programs show off. You know, you've earned your AmeriCorps Rockstar badge. You know what you're doing. You have an up and running program, and it's now time to show off your success via reports and monitoring visits. So can you tell I'm trying to make, you know, reports and monitoring visits fun? Um, so, you know, when we do go operational, the Serve Washington Commission does have some responsibility in prevention, detection, and enforcement. And that's really how we look at our success as well as your successes. You know, are we giving you what you need upfront through that prevention lens? Are we providing the training and technical assistance, doing all of the pre-work so that when we do come out and monitor or you do submit your reports, we already know where you're at, you know where we're at, and everything's very transparent. Now, of course, there's sometimes the need for improvement planning or corrective action, and that's some of what chapters 5 and 6 will kind of start to show you. But that is a really long time away and too far to really dig into, but you're welcome to, you know, peruse that and just know that's kind of how the handbook wraps up. So we'll move away from the handbook and in closing, just kind of do some introductions to opportunities and some staff and a few other notes here as we close, and then I'll open it up for questions. You know, it might feel really early to talk about thinking about applying for an operational grant, but it's really not. And it can occur simultaneously within your planning project period. It doesn't have to, but it can. I'm actually going to provide a handout on your planning grant webpage that will go over this in more detail. Um, but I thought I'd just kind of run through what does it look like for Serve Washington to offer planning grant opportunities. And this is where our standard process is kind of a fall spring competition, and one of them is for formula dollars and one of them is competitive dollars, and I'll kind of talk to that. So because here we are, you know, coming out of winter, preparing for spring, or at least I'm always ready to prepare for warmer weather. And this is part of my other job where I'm starting to build our spring competition. That will actually occur, you know, in March, right in the middle of your planning project period. And we'll do a session on that RFGA. There'll be a bidders meeting for the public to attend to learn more about that. And we'll actually, I don't know if you've noticed, but in kind of the calendar of webinars, there's a period in March where we don't have a lot going on because we wanted to make sure to pause and give folks that are going to apply early the time to dedicate to grant writing. So if you were to apply here just in a couple of months, what that would look like is consecutive and sequential awards. So your planning grant, which is set to end at the end of January, the formula competition is really for programs that are going to start like August, September. And majority of our AmeriCorps programs run similar to a school year. Now, it doesn't have to be that way. It's just kind of how it works. We do have a high percentage of folks working within the educational systems. You can run a calendar year program. We do have a couple of environmental programs that run January through December. Either way, this spring competition is your ability to kind of run right through your planning grant and kick off an operational award. Now, if you'd rather completely get through your planning grant to assess whether or not it's appropriate to apply, you'll have two other competitions available to you that would essentially create a gap year. And in the fall of 2022 is our competitive competition. This is the national competition. It does require a little more edge or savviness. There are definitely some planning grants that we would advise go this direction, but often, and I will continue to talk and educate about this, often we will say most planning grants start in the formula local pool where we're making the decisions instead of the federal agency making the decisions. So fall of 22 and spring of 2023 would be two opportunities that would provide you a singular gap year before you actually started operational. And then maybe that's not even enough time. So I just went ahead and said, you know, you could do 2 years. We have no expectations. Some commissions are different, but we have no expectations. There's no requirements in your contract that you even apply. We really believe that this is a time to pursue funding sources, relationships, partnerships, and even to examine whether or not this is the most probable or likely intervention to meet your desired outcome. So we have planning grants that sometimes choose not to apply. We have planning grants that sometimes find that Vista is a better option. We've had some successful folks go that direction. And we have a really high rate of success in planning grants going operational. So lots of options. You don't have to decide now, and I will begin to coach each program through our one-on-ones on this kind of stuff. And again, look for that handout once it's posted after this recording. I also wanted to show you our kind of larger team that you may come into contact with. When we're in person, they often drop by and introduce themselves. In lieu of that, here's our virtual introduction. I'll start on the bottom left with Thomas. Thomas is our fiscal grants officer. So just as it says in his title, he is everything fiscal. He is the individual for every one of our planning and operational grants that helps oversee drawdown process, reimbursement process, federal financial reports, you know, fiscal. So you're going to get to, oh yeah, Thomas is on the line today. Hi, Thomas. Thomas is only been with us for what? Has it been 6 months yet? Thomas, you're kind of new to Serve Washington. He came from an AmeriCorps program out east. We are really excited to have him, and he is going to be end of April. Thank you. He is going to be hosting and presenting next week's call, doing a basic overview of OMB principles, and probably more important to you and your fiscal staff, how to get your money. So look forward to that next week. And then I'll move above Thomas. There is Lou Thompson. Lou is our performance management analyst. They are very well educated on theory of change and logic models and performance measures and long-term, both rigorous and non-rigorous scientific evaluations. Lou, you will be introduced to in our late January and February webinars, where we start to help you build that framework and that design of your program. So we look forward to introducing Lou to you. And then you may or may not come into contact or hear from the folks on the right, Jenny and Mary. They are kind of my counterparts, the additional program officers. They split a caseload of operational grants as well as helping to oversee all of our events for AmeriCorps members and AmeriCorps programs. And since it didn't fit on the previous slide, there I am in the corner, again, primarily working with the grant making process, training technical assistance, and planning grants. So if you were in receipt of the welcome message, and if you weren't, someone in your organization was, it had all of the calendar appointments and links for our upcoming webinars. I do tend to send reminders. Really, next week on January 13th is important to make sure your fiscal reps have that information and can participate. We would also encourage program staff to come. I know you might feel like, oh, that's just not me, that's not what I do. But one of the things that we believe strongly in AmeriCorps is that has to be a partnership, and your fiscal staff have to know just enough about the program, and the program staff need to know just about the fiscal side to really pull off a successful program. So after that is when the kind of harder work, curriculum-based individual aspects really start. So January 20th, Lou will be with us to start talking about theory of change. And thereafter, we will have kind of bi-monthly curriculums here and there. I will also be reaching out to each one of the organizations to schedule up routine one-on-one calls, maybe twice a month or something, so we can check in and you can have some space with me to talk specifically about your program design and your interventions. Once we do start that curriculum, you probably saw in your handout that there is a series of homework assignments. They're kind of considered your contract deliverables, excuse me. And that's where the really exciting work actually starts. So look forward to spending your time outside of these calls on those pieces. So this was a lot of information, a lot of superficial information, and it can definitely have folks that are maybe not yet familiar with AmeriCorps feeling upside down and backwards. In addition, no less, we're still working through a pandemic. We just had the holidays. There's a lot of reasons to maybe not feel super comfortable yet, and that's okay. Why we have these periods is by the end of the period, is our goal to really give you the knowledge, skills, and confidence to flip that feeling and to enter into a successful operational program. So with that, I'm happy to take some questions. I'm going to go ahead and actually stop the recording and maybe even stop my sharing and turn on my camera so that we can just have a informal conversation. Thank you all for being here. If you need to run, I totally get that, but I will hang out for questions.